So for this assignment, we're going to take what we learned from Fruit Face, the basic move tools, selection tools especially, and apply them to a slightly more complicated image. This next main tool that we're going to learn in this portion is called the clone stamp tool. It's one of the most powerful tools in Photoshop. It's very handy. We'll get into exactly how it works later on, but essentially what you can do is select an area of your canvas and then copy the texture in a certain area and paint over other areas. So it works great for something like this where I have a very distressed looking photograph. I can copy a section from here and draw over it to completely hide some of these scuffed images out. Now you can get a little creepy with it, and that since it'll copy literally anything you tell it to, I could copy his face and start drawing it here, and things get a little weird. But that's not what we're going to use it for today. Today we're just going to focus first off on cleaning up these specks. So as you would start with any other normal image, go ahead and duplicate the layer. You guys all remember to do that? It's, what's the hotkey for it?
Control-J.
Control-Command-J. Very good. So we'll get layer 1 here. I'll call it working layer, I suppose, so I know which one's which. And then we can go ahead and jump down into the clone stamp tool itself. So it's about halfway down on your tool palette here. The shortcut key, if you want to take notes, is S. And using it kind of looks a lot like the Paintbrush tool. What happens is, once I have it selected, instead of a little lasso icon or an arrow icon, I just have a circle. And this circle represents the brush size that I'll use for copying the texture, for cloning with the stamp tool. So this one's a little bit trickier than the others in that I have to hold down something to tell it where I want to start copying from. So we're going to use a couple of different hotkeys here right now. First and foremost, if I want to make the size of this cursor bigger or smaller, use the brackets. It's the keys that are just above your return key. Bracketing to the right makes it nice and big. Bracketing to the left makes it nice and small. You'll also notice, since I said this tool has a lot of similarities with the brush tool, if I right-click anywhere on the image, I get a little dialog box that pops up and gives me a lot of different options. These are all the different brushes that Photoshop comes preloaded with. For the clone stamp tool, since we want a really subtle and kind of soft-looking, believable clone, double-click the soft-looking kind of gradient fuzzy circle here on the left. So if I double-click that, we now have our brush selected for what we're going to use for our clone stamp tool.
Can you bring up that last menu again?
If you want to change the type of brush, like between hard and soft, you can right-click anywhere on the screen once you have the stamp tool selected.
Okay, gotcha.
So you get all these different kinds of brush tools. You can scroll down and see tons and tons and tons of them. But the main ones you'll ever use, essentially, are just the more firm one and the soft one. We'll use the soft one this time. So now we have our tool selected. We know how to make our brush size smaller or larger. Now, for using the clone stamp tool, there's a couple of good guidelines to make it look believable. If I use a smaller brush and I use short, quick strokes, it's going to look much more believable than if I use a really long stroke. For instance, if I'm trying to trace around his head and I start a selection here and I do it with one solid stripe, it looks believable enough at first before I mess up. But if we had a better projector and you could really zoom in, you'll start to see kind of a repeating pattern, and that's kind of like the telltale sign that something has been photoshopped, is if you see that repeating pattern over and over again. So we want to teach you guys to do this right. And if you're going to fake something, you're going to fake it well. So go ahead and shrink our brush size down. And how do I do that? What's the hotkey? Brackets, yep. So I bracket down. Let's take care of this little dot here first. With my stamp tool still selected, I hold down Option. And without clicking anything, you notice my tool changes from an open circle to like a bullseye. Now what the bullseye does is while I hold Option, I say, okay, Photoshop, I'm going to tell you right with this bullseye where I want you to start copying from. And from that point on is wherever I click after that is what you're going to duplicate. So if I tell it to copy an area of this background, and I click once to kind of set the bullseye to going, then when I mouse over my brush, mouse over this mistake, even before I click, you'll notice it starts to go away. And the reason why, again, our projector's not really helping us out here, but the reason why is that it's previewing what I'm going to clone. So if I were to tell it to copy his eye, by holding Option and clicking his eyeball, anywhere I click or wherever I hover, you can see, okay, this is like a previewed image of what it's going to look like when I start using the clone stamp tool. So if I Option click near my mistake, I copy that background texture, and then I just click one time, and it instantly goes away. So once more, I have my clone stamp tool out. I hold Option to set the parameter of where I want to start copying from. I copy nearby, and then I just click once, and I get rid of it. You can keep doing this for all of these different specs around. So I'll Option click somewhere nearby, use short, quick strokes with my soft brush, and paint it over. Now the reason why I keep telling you to continually Option click is because, again, we want to make this look good, right? Not fake. So if I always tell it to copy the same little section of texture over and over and over again, even at first you don't realize it, looking back, you can kind of start to see that copy pattern. It looks really bad. However, if I'm copying from an area very close to where the mistake is that I want to cover up, it's going to look much more blended and much more believable. This especially happens on like shadows of people's faces and things like that. If you copy a shadow from under the collar instead of a shadow on their actual skin tone, it won't look nearly believable. So you always want to try to tell the clone stamp tool to copy from an area very close to where you're going to be covering up. So go ahead and be giving it a try. Click Option, click and drag over some areas here. It just fix up all these little white dents you see in. You'll also notice that besides just copying texture, you can actually use it, if you're very precise with your clicking, to copy edges. So if you check out this section of his shoulder here, and sometimes it's kind of hard if I just copied the bottom part of the suit. It's kind of hard to make it look believable without kind of getting a fuzzy tumor on his shoulder. Let's use the edge then to our advantage. So since this copies anything and everything we tell it to, I'll make my brush size a little bit bigger so you can see. If I set my copy point from a lower part of his shoulder here that has that kind of angle that I want to replicate, and I move it over perfectly, you see how I can use this preview to kind of like match it up just right? Then if I click one time, it does it perfectly. I get a nice solid edge that looks very believable, and then I can do the little detail work on the bottom. So not only can you use it for duplicating things like texture, but you could duplicate edges of objects. If you took a picture of someone and the light pole is unfortunately right behind their head and it looks like it's sticking out of it, you can just texture over the background and then it goes away. It's very, very helpful. Some other short keys that are worth writing down, especially when you're getting real precise like this and you want to zoom in and out a lot. For Macs, if I hold down spacebar, I get the hand tool, which allows me, if I keep holding down space, I can drag around to a specific part of the image. If I want to zoom in, I keep holding spacebar. It gets a little tricky. Keep holding spacebar and then additionally hold down Command. You notice this changes my hand icon into a magnifying glass. Now anywhere I click and drag will zoom in to the spot. If I say, oh, that was good, but I need more of his head, I zoomed in too much, I add one more button into the mix. So now I have spacebar, Command, and Option, and that gives me the zoom out tool.
Yeah, we just won't go that far.
For PCs, it's spacebar Control to zoom in, and then spacebar Control Alt to zoom out. So that's very helpful when you're doing a lot of detail work, and then you kind of just need to zoom out a little bit rather than click, 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 click to go all the way out. I can just hit Command 0, and that takes me to a default zoom all that fills the screen. So it kind of zooms out so that the image fills the entire screen. Again, you can survive without knowing all of these shortcuts, but if they can cut the amount of time that it takes you to work on a project in half, they're definitely worth knowing. There's not an autosave function for Photoshop, so it's a great habit to get used to hitting Command S or Control S to save your image. And after you fill out this first prompt of what you want to call it and where, in this case we'll still save it as a PSD because we want to remember all of our layers. We'll save it just to the desktop as oldimage.psd. Say yes, I'd like to maximize compatibility. And now from then on out, anytime I make another change, if I just hit Command S or Control S, it doesn't need to ask me again, it just automatically does it. Just like with a Word doc or anything else. So the next step we're going to do is using all of the selection tools that we learned for Fruit Face, we're going to select certain areas of this image and then add color to them. So for starters, let's give this guy a flashy new coat. I recommend starting with the Lasso Tool since things like Magic Wand and Magnetic Lasso won't work so well on this one since it's so washed out and gray. I prefer just doing it by hand. So go ahead and click anywhere you want to get started. All the way down.
Wait, you just in the Lasso Tool?
Uh-huh, just with the lasso. So I've clicked and I'm holding down this whole time. And with my very steady hand, I'm tracing. And then right as I get to the very bottom, I accidentally mess up and let go. Oh no! If I wanted to add to this selection, to add the last part of his lapel that I cut off, what would I hold to do that?
Shift Alt.
Shift. And if you ever don't remember off the top of your head, just holding one or the other will give you a plus or minus sign. So Shift gives me the plus sign, and then I just add to it. Just the coat. So you see my selection is the marching ants go just around the coat. It's kind of like a V shape. So you have a rough approximate selection of our coat now. I want to make a new layer by hand. So you see this button down here where it says create new layer. If I mouse over it, it's right to the left of the trash can. It's very small, but it looks like a page with the corner being upturned. Click that button, and I'll have a layer 1. Now we get to start having fun with color. We still have our selection going. We're on the correct layer. That's okay. So you have your coat selected. Click new layer, which is down near the trash can. Once it looks like a page being turned. Hit that once. Okay, so you still have your selection. You got your new layer. Let's go ahead and grab the paintbrush. Hotkey is B for brush. It's an easy one to remember. It's about halfway down on the tool palette here. But before we can start painting, there's one last thing we need to change. You'll almost never need to worry about this since you'll probably be doing basic RGB color modes, but we'll notice that in the top left corner here, you see how it says oldimage.psd. That's the name of my file. It says 122%, which is how much I'm zoomed in, what layer I'm on, and then it says gray. That's a problem. If I wanted to pick a regular color, like a nice brown suit that I have here, and I click OK, it still shows up as gray. This should be changing color. The reason why it doesn't is because my image mode is set on grayscale. We want to change that to RGB. Again, this is a step most of you probably won't need to worry about. But if for whatever reason you're working with an old photograph, somebody had it in RGB, or sorry, in after you click that, say don't flatten. Do not flatten. Don't merge, don't flatten. We want to keep our layers like we have them. So now you notice that color changed. If you want to pick your color, you can have it be brown, blue, whichever one you think will look good as a jacket. You just double click this little square here for the foreground color. I click wherever I want my color to be. You kind of have two options here. You have a slider that gives you the general range of color, and then you actually have to pick a specific tint or hue here. So if I want a red, I drag up to the red area, and then I click on the brightest red that I want. If I want a brown, I go down to kind of the orangey yellow area and click a deeper shade of brown. So once you click OK, you should notice that the square turns that color that you selected. Is everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so once we have our color selected, we still have our marching ants around our jacket, correct? Everyone good? Then, since we're all in a professional Photoshop class, we just paint all over it. Looks totally believable, right? End of session. Thank you all for coming. I'm glad I could help you out. No, but this is our first step that we're going to do. So once I have, yes, you double click this box here, you select your color, first for the slider and then with the actual color itself. Click OK. Then with the brush tool, which is, the hotkey is B for brush, I can just start painting everywhere inside here. And notice I don't have to carefully trace the lines because I have a selection made. Since I already made my selection, I can't trace outside the lines even if I try. I'm still holding it down, but you notice the color only shows up inside my lines. That's because I have that selection made, and those marching ants will only let the color show up in that little area. Also good to remember, if I wanted to make my life easier, it's going to take me forever if I'm coloring in like this. How do I make my brush size bigger? Bracket. Bracket up, I get a nice big one, and then I can just go over it real fast. Okay, so now we have two ways to make this more believable. The first way is to change the opacity of the layer itself. You notice on my layer palette here, there's a tiny box right here that says opacity. If I take that down, if I have less opacity, it makes it more transparent. So that layer becomes semi-transparent. So again, I choose my layer 1. I can go ahead and call it jacket. Up to the top right of the layer menu is a box that says opacity. I can click the little down arrow and I get a little slider, and I can change it as much as I want. Okay, so you'll notice it's a good start. I mean, I can kind of see through the color a little bit, but you'll notice especially around the shadows under the collar and the buttons, it looks very washed out. And it's because we're just kind of basically putting up a muddy screen for you to look through. I'm not actually coloring it. And the shadows and everything will look a lot more washed out. So this is a good start, but we don't want to use this for now. Go ahead and turn your opacity back up to 100. Back up to ugly, solid, non-believable color. Undo all that hard work. So now, instead of just changing the opacity, Photoshop has these things called layer blend options that can change the way that layers interact with one another. So up till now, if we want something to be visible on top, you just drag the layer to the top, right? It's pretty simple. Up till now, they've basically just been sitting on top of each other. They don't recognize it, they don't really talk to each other, they're just separate. We can change some options, though, that make them interact with each other based on the order they're in. So with my jacket layer still selected here, you see where it says normal right next to where opacity was? If I click that, I get a ton of these different options. Now, these are all our different layer blend modes. The two that I want you to pay attention to this time are multiply and overlay. Click one of those. So now, what we just did, now it looks, you notice, see how much darker the shadows look? Looks much more believable. It's not washed out anymore, it's crisp. The reason why is because we took that solid brown layer and said, okay, jacket layer, I want you to apply this special blend mode with the layer beneath you, which is the guy's actual photograph, and blend between the two. So what Multiply does is it kind of does a mixture of changing the opacity down and upping the contrast so that whatever it's directly on top of will look like it's really kind of been embedded. You'll notice that Overlay does a similar thing, but it's just a little bit brighter. What's great is that you can actually use these techniques together. So just like how we did opacity the first time and it didn't quite look believable on its own, well, we can still change it together with this new one. So if I still want to tweak the color just a little bit without going and picking a new color by hand, I can kind of tweak that a little bit and it changes the lightness and darkness of my image.
You're just affecting that one layer.
Just
correct?
the one layer, yes. So now let's say I had this good selection, I got a pretty believable looking jacket color, it looks really nice, but I kind of noticed I missed a little bit of his shoulder there in the top right. I have a little bit of that white shown through, it's really bugging me. How do I go back and add to it? Well, I can zoom in nice and tight, and instead of using just the selection tool first and then painting with the paintbrush, I can actually just kind of freehand some of the details with the paintbrush tool. So I click back on my brush, I make sure I'm on my jacket layer, I go in with a much smaller paintbrush size here, and I can start painting on top. This is also when you can really notice the difference. Remember when we were using the clone stamp tool and we could pick between a soft brush and a round brush? Here's the difference between the two. A hard round one looks like that. Well, let's do an actual noticeable image. Hard round one looks like that, and a soft round one of the exact same size looks like that. You see the difference in how one is very gradual and kind of softer, has very soft edges, and then the one on the right is very hard and crisp. So when doing some detail work, I usually go in with a soft brush, so I'd click this one here, and have a very small size.
We don't have the dancing ants anymore.
You should not have any dancing ants. If you do, you can go up to Select, Deselect. So Select, Deselect. Or you can also see right there, it also tells you Command D or Control D is your shortcut. That will get rid of your marching ants, and then you are free to add by hand. So once you have that basic technique down, you can use this time to start refining your edges, make those look nice and smooth, get rid of all the shining through gray bits, or you can go ahead and start selecting the tie and apply another color to it using the same technique. So once you have your jacket selected, just a refresher, if we wanted to do the tie, you do the exact same process. So starting off back onto our working layer, I get my lasso out, I select an approximation of my tie here, after I have it traced, I duplicate it with Command J. So let's say I've done that, and I have this selected, or I duplicated my layer. I went to all that hard work, though, to make a new layer with my tie, and after I've named it, I wish I had it selected again. How can I go back and, do I have to retrace the whole thing, or is there a shorter way to do this? Thankfully, there is. If you already have a new layer made, in this case my tie layer, if I want to automatically select a layer with my marching ants, if I hold Command for Mac or Control for PCs, and I click the actual thumbnail of the layer, not in the bar, but the actual thumbnail itself, this tiny little picture, it automatically selects the layer, which can really help save you some time for all that hard work you did getting it.
So
Yes.
that selects every non-transparent pixel on the layer.
On the layer, yes.
Okay.
So on my tie layer, if I accidentally drew this weird little blob
Right,
here,
it's gonna include
and
that
then
too.
I command click it, it selects both of them.
Got it.
So that's why it's helpful to make your selection first, duplicate it onto its own layer so it's nice and transparent. Alright, so I have my tie selected, it's on its own layer. How do I colorize it? Pick my color, say I want a blue tie. Now what?
Brush it.
Control J.
It's already Control J, it's already copied. I got my brush out, it's selected, it's ready to go.
Color it.
Color over it, and then how do I make it believable?
Blend it.
Yes,
Multiply or
changing the layer blending mode to either multiply or overlay. And you notice they don't look like it's doing anything until I turn the other one on, because it has to blend with whatever is directly beneath it.
Landon, question about viewability of layers.
Uh-huh.
If I want to is there a quick way to oh, I only want to see this layer, or
Yes.
I want to see every layer but this one. You know what I mean?
Option clicking the eyeball
There
will
it is.
make all of them invisible but the one you click on.
Which is of course.
That's kind of a fancy shortcut, so yeah. Option clicking the eyeball hides everything but that one layer.
That's alt click for this.
Okay, so I created
Very
a
cool.
tie layer.
Now to make this color
You
polka dot.
reselect it. So you hold down
So now we get a little bit trickier.
and then click inside.
Now I want you guys to colorize his face and his
So you
hair.
don't have it selected. This is all you have selected.
Now you do that in mostly the same way,
Yeah.
but you'll notice, especially with
Do
hair,
this first. Go here.
having just a straight selection made with the lasso tool looks very much toupee-ish. If I do the same thing here, I'll do a quick approximation
Have something to do.
for you guys to see.
Now Command or Control J.
Do. Get a little
Oh shoot.
bit of hair going here. Duplicate it.
You reselect the tie.
Name it hair.
Holding down Control and clicking on the
And I give him some deep auburn locks.
Now you can pick color over it.
Even with my same tricks, I've done everything the exact same way with multiply and everything like that. You see how the edge of his hair and his face is so stark? What I recommend doing is actually, after you have a good kind of approximation here, I have my own hair layer. Remember how we touched up the details on the coat? I just went in with a paintbrush. I didn't have to use the lasso at all.
Press Command J.
On this one, I'm going to specifically draw
So now it's on
and color outside the lines, which violates every kindergarten rule you probably ever learned, but that's okay. The reason why is because after I do that, I'm going to go in and erase with my eraser and specifically have a soft brush with that eraser. I know I'm going a little fast right now, so slow down. I made the hair layer just like I made everything else, but I purposely draw outside the lines so that when I erase with a soft looking eraser, the line that it gives me is much more smooth and blended than that really stark lasso based line. You also notice that the larger I have my brush, the softer the edge is. So if I have a very large brush and I actually start from farther away, you can see it kind of barely tweaks it. Versus if I have a very tiny one, then the blend is not very soft and it kind of defeats the purpose. It looks too sharp, which is what we wanted to get rid of. So too small and it looks not good. If I make it a little bit wider, I get that nice soft kind of believable hairline that we're all looking for in life. And this works as the same way for the outside edge of the hair, because even having a sharp edge on the outside looks just as fake as a sharp looking hairline. So I just kind of go in and I'm erasing in a wide area all around his hair. And just making it look a little bit more believable. If you want to individually colorize each of his eyes, good luck. If you can do that and not make it look creepy, please tell me how to do it. It's very difficult. But it is worth noting that when you're colorizing his skin, using whatever shade of skin tone that you want, it can look a little trickier than things like clothing, because shadows on a face look a little bit softer and smoother than, say, shadows on clothing. So if I did a similar thing with my hair, select his face very, very quickly and sloppily here, go to my original layer, duplicate it. You'll notice if I pick sort of tan skin here, a lot of browns in this image. I may have to change his coat later. First of all, you'll notice that whatever skin tone I pick ends up looking much darker when I start to blend it. Whoops. Yeah, I think I like multiply a little better. But you'll see how, like, especially his eyes and things like that kind of don't quite look believable. I mean, for one thing, he obviously does not have skin color on the whites of his eyes. I could go in with my eraser tool then and very daintily erase them, but then that just looks horrifying. So I guess we'll assign that for extra credit. If you can make the eyes actually look believable and colored and not like really terrifying, that's awesome. I tip my hat to you. Oh, especially on the projector, his face looks green. Why didn't anyone tell me? So I guess be saving your images. Make sure you definitely save it as a PSD. If you save it as a JPEG or anything else first, we'll lose all, it can't remember any of the layers. We'll lose all of our hard work with our different layering. The format should be, it'll just say Photoshop. It won't actually say PSD. It's the first one in the menu.
Oh, okay.
And we can save it
So-
with that same name, or do we need to change the name?
No, you can save it as the same name. Old face or old image or whatever it is, it's fine. So make your final changes tonight over homework, just like with your fruit face. Get each individual section colored, have the shirt, face, hair, tie all colored up, and submit that to courses whenever you're finished. As Hong said earlier, in the next couple of sessions we'll get a little bit more into some of the design theory. What you have to look forward to on the next day, we're going to jump into masking, which is probably the best thing you can learn about Photoshop. Anytime you need a background of a JPEG or something removed so that it's nice and transparent, say for like a PowerPoint slide or anything like that, you don't want that ugly white box around it. That's what you can do with masking. Anytime you're compiling several images together and you want some things to be visible and some things to not be visible, that's masking. It's a fantastic way to essentially, you know how you have Command Z to undo your mistakes? Basically, this allows you to erase things or make some things transparent in a completely temporary way so that you can very, very easily, it's almost like having infinity undos. You can go in and individually undo certain parts and keep things the same. So it's a very, very powerful tool. It's very, very useful, and we're going to spend all of next class working on it. But thank you guys for showing up today. You did some great work. I look forward to seeing how they all turn out when you submit them to courses.
Awesome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.